Submerged below the Atlantic waves during World War II, Germany's Type 21 submarines were the culmination of intense research, unprecedented ambition, and the desperate wartime quest to maintain naval supremacy. Known by the German term Elektroboot, meaning electric boat, these diesel-electric marvels represented a major shift in submarine design. Whereas older submarines spent much of their patrols on the surface, dipping under the water primarily to avoid detection, the Type 21 was conceived to stay submerged for most of its mission. That might sound commonplace by modern standards, but in the middle of the 20th century, it was a revolutionary leap forward. The goal was to grant German U-boat commanders the ability to stalk Allied convoys silently and strike without surfacing, a strategic advantage that had previously been unattainable. Although historians generally credit these vessels with impressive technological breakthroughs, the Type 21s were also riddled with mechanical flaws and production troubles that prevented them from reaching their full combat potential. By the end of World War II, the dream of a stealthy, battery-powered force prowling the Atlantic remained largely unrealized. The ambition behind the design. For years, German U-boats held the Atlantic in a grip of terror. In the early stages of World War II, Allied merchant shipping was under constant threat. However, as the war progressed, Allied air superiority and improved convoy tactics severely hampered existing submarine classes like the Type 7. Traditional submarines were effectively surface ships that could dive briefly, but they could not stay under the water for extended periods because of battery limitations and the need to recharge frequently. The Type 21 flipped that narrative. The designers aimed to create a sleek, hydrodynamically efficient craft that could remain submerged for days. This was no small feat. To accomplish that, they packed these U-boats with a much larger array of battery cells, approximately 3 times more than those found in earlier German submarines. This expanded battery capacity allowed the craft to cruise beneath the waves at around 5.75 miles per hour for up to 75 hours, a stark improvement over earlier models that might only stay submerged for hours at a time. Though it still needed to come up to snorkel depth to recharge, the time spent near the surface was drastically cut to less than 5 hours, thanks to new, supercharged diesel engines. Another groundbreaking feature was the Type 21's hull shape. This submarine was designed with a streamlined hull that reduced drag significantly, especially when submerged. The conning tower, once a protruding structure that generated additional drag and noise, was reimagined to blend more gracefully with the hull. Freed from some of the old design constraints, the engineers even introduced power-assisted torpedo reloading, enabling all 6 bow tubes to be rearmed far more quickly than in previous boats. Rushed production and quality issues. All these innovative features came with a steep cost. Germany, by the mid-1940s, was under intense pressure as the tide of the war turned against it. The decision was made to mass-produce Type 21 submarines using modular construction, an approach that could, under ideal circumstances, reduce the assembly time to under 6 months per boat. The plan was straightforward. Have multiple factories build prefabricated sections, then assemble those sections at the shipyard. In theory, it should have allowed Germany to churn out these advanced submarines in record numbers. In reality, the process was plagued by inefficiencies and quality control failures. Many subcontractors had little to no experience with shipbuilding. They struggled to meet the exacting standards required for submarine hull sections. In a normal production setting, each component would be rigorously tested, fitted, and tested again before final assembly. But with time running out and resources stretched thin, thorough checks gave way to rushed final assembly, leaving plenty of flaws. As a result, many newly launched Type 21s had to undergo extensive repairs before they were even seaworthy. Albert Speer, Germany's Minister of Armaments and War Production, had overseen the expansion of the industrial base to meet wartime needs. However, allocating the manufacture of submarine segments to facilities unfamiliar with naval engineering introduced an array of production snafus. Welding inconsistencies threatened the pressure hull's integrity, Hydraulic systems were mounted in vulnerable positions outside the primary hull, and the snorkel design often caused difficulties in practical operation. Historians note that even if all technical problems had been solved, the submarines would still face the challenge of Allied air coverage that by 1944 was enormous and lethal. Limited wartime service. Despite the aspiration to build hundreds of these advanced crafts, only 118 Type 21 submarines were completed before the war ended. Out of those, a mere 4 managed to reach a state fit for combat by the closing days of the conflict. The German Navy commissioned several for sea trials, but these final months of the war were chaotic, with many harbors under threat and logistic networks in disarray. 2 Type 21 submarines, U-2511 and U-3008, actually embarked on war patrols. Their missions were cut short by Germany's surrender in early May of 1945. Commanders boasted that on at least one occasion, a Type 21 had maneuvered into a perfect firing position on an Allied cruiser without being detected, demonstrating the submarine's stealth and agility. Yet, by that point, Germany's capacity to wage an effective naval campaign in the Atlantic was virtually gone. The Type 21s might have been the most advanced diesel-electric submarines of their time, but they arrived too late to make a real difference in the war's outcome. Life beneath the waves. One of the often overlooked aspects of these submarines is the improved living conditions for the crews. In earlier boats, space was so tight that men slept in shifts, sharing bunks so that one might lie down for rest immediately after another got up. Food storage was minimal, and morale frequently suffered on long patrols. In the Type 21, the design team made a point to accommodate larger crew quarters and even install a freezer to preserve supplies. That might sound like a small detail, but in the frigid, damp conditions of a submarine, having better food and a bit more space could boost morale significantly. Also significant were the electric creep motors, designed for silent running. Submarine warfare was all about stealth. Running too loudly in enemy waters risked detection by sonar or hydrophones. These smaller, quieter motors allowed the Type 21 to glide through the depths, reducing its acoustic signature. When combined with the streamlined hull design, this feature allowed the boat to approach targets stealthily, or evade pursuit with minimal noise. Impressive underwater speed. Older submarines could make reasonable speeds on the surface using diesel engines, but struggled to maintain more than a fraction of that speed when submerged, relying solely on battery power. The Type 21 turned this convention on its head by focusing on maximum submerged performance. In earlier designs, engineers might accept a slower underwater speed because they assumed the submarine would surface most of the time. For the Type 21, speed beneath the water became a priority. Powered by enhanced electric motors, the Type 21 could reach around 17.2 knots underwater, approximately 19.8 miles per hour, an astounding leap compared to older boats that were often limited to less than 8 miles per hour when submerged. This advantage was crucial. Surfacing to reposition for an attack had been a dangerous necessity in earlier U-boat doctrine. The moment a submarine showed its silhouette above the waves, it risked being spotted by aircraft or radar-equipped escort ships. With the Type 21, a commander could remain submerged and still achieve speeds sufficient to close in on a convoy or escape a pursuer. Torpedo armament and reloading speed and stealth would mean little without potent firepower, and here the Type 21 also excelled. It carried 6 torpedo tubes in the bow, a significant step up from many German boats that only had 4. These tubes could be rapidly reloaded by a hydraulic system, something older submarines could not dream of. Astonishingly, the Type 21 could fire 18 torpedoes in under 20 minutes, a rate of fire that no Allied escort could match at the time. There were many different torpedo types in use during World War II, but the German Navy tended to prioritize advanced acoustic homing torpedoes later in the war. The Type 21's capacity to reload swiftly and silently might have spelled devastation for Allied shipping had the boat been available in numbers earlier and had the mechanical reliability been up to par. Unfortunately for Germany, late war shortages and sabotage by forced laborers also impacted torpedo production. So not every Type 21 was equipped with the most modern munitions. The giant bunker, Valentin submarine pens. One of the most dramatic testaments to the ambition behind the Type 21 was the colossal Valentin submarine pens near the port of Fard, close to Bremen. This massive, reinforced concrete structure was intended to be a final assembly area for Type 21 hull sections. By consolidating construction in an enormous, bomb-proof facility, German planners hoped to shield the submarines from Allied air raids and accelerate their deployment. Building such a bunker was no small task. Around 10,000 forced laborers, composed of concentration camp prisoners and prisoners of war, worked in brutal conditions from 1943 to 1945. Despite their Herculean efforts, the site was only about 90% complete when Allied bombers dropped Grand Slam earthquake bombs, causing heavy structural damage. Soon after, British forces captured the region, ending any hope of completing the facility. For these unfortunate laborers, the Valentin pens were a place of unimaginable hardship, underscoring the darker side of Nazi Germany's industrial push. While the U-boats themselves often capture headlines for their futuristic designs, it is equally important to remember how large-scale building projects in the Third Reich were frequently driven by forced labor at great human cost. Post-war fate. When Germany surrendered in May of 1945, many of its naval assets were either scuttled to prevent capture or taken as prizes by the Allied powers. The Type 21 was no exception. Allies recognized the advanced nature of these submarines and scrambled to gain first-hand experience with them. Several navies around the world acquired Type 21 submarines or used their design as a template for future classes. United States. The United States took possession of U-25-113 and U-3008, testing them extensively to understand their design strengths and weaknesses. In November of 1946, President Harry S. Truman was famously aboard U-25-113 when it made a demonstration dive to 440 feet. Such depth capability was intriguing to the U.S. Navy, which had previously operated diesel-electric submarines that were inferior in many respects to the Type 21. Both captured submarines contributed valuable data to the U.S. Navy's Greater Underwater Propulsion Power Program, commonly referred to as GUPPY, which aimed to upgrade older American submarines by streamlining their hulls and improving their battery systems. Although U-25-13 was eventually used as a target and sunk in 1951, and U-3008 was scrapped in 1955, their influence lived on in the next generation of American subs. Soviet Union. In the post-war partition of German naval assets, the Soviet Union received 4 Type 21 boats, U-225-29, U-3035, U-3041, and U-3515. Renamed B-27, B-28, B-29, and B-30, they served the Soviet Navy, offering valuable insights into advanced submarine design. Western intelligence was convinced that the Soviets might have taken more Type 21 hulls, possibly completing or modifying them in captured shipyards. While definitive proof of vast Soviet reconstruction efforts is scarce, it is well documented that the Type 21 heavily influenced subsequent Soviet designs, including what NATO would label the Whiskey, Zulu, and Romeo classes. These lines of submarines, built in significant numbers during the Cold War, showcased a clear lineage from the German electroboot concept. Their hull shapes, battery enhancements, and snorkel arrangements all owed a debt to the Type 21's radical design principles. United Kingdom. The Royal Navy commissioned U-3017 as HMS N41, deploying it for tests and evaluations until 1949. Though scrapped later that year, it provided the British valuable data that informed the design of more modern subs, such as the Porpoise class. As with other Allied nations, the British realized that submerged cruising speed and battery endurance were the real future of submarine warfare. France. The French Navy also found use for a Type 21, renaming U-2518 as Roland Morelot. It served actively and even took part in the Suez Crisis of 1956. Although it remained in commission until 1967, the submarine was ultimately scrapped 2 years later. Still, for over a decade, it gave France a modern testbed for training crews and refining undersea tactics. Surviving examples and discoveries. Of all the Type 21s, only one remains afloat, U-2540. Raised and restored after the war, it went into service under the name Wilhelm Bauer and served as a research vessel in the newly formed West German Bundesmarine. Eventually decommissioned and turned into a museum ship, it now rests at the German Maritime Museum in Bremerhaven. Visitors can walk through its corridors and see firsthand the advanced engineering that once promised to transform naval warfare. In the realm of sunken relics, many Type 21 hulls were scuttled or destroyed after the war. A few remain beneath the ocean, attracting experienced divers or maritime archaeologists. U-2513 rests in about 213 feet of water, roughly 81 miles west of Key West, Florida. While accessible, it is considered a challenging dive due to its depth. Similarly, Operation Deadlight, the Allied plan to dispose of captured U-boats, left a number of these vessels in watery graves off Northern Ireland. Recent expeditions have located some of these hulls, which, although corroded, still bear witness to the advanced features that set them apart. Evaluating impact and legacy. Although the Type 21 did not alter the course of World War II, it signaled the submarine's future path. The ability to remain submerged for extended periods at relatively high speeds was a game-changer, paving the way for modern nuclear submarines that can stay underwater for weeks or months without resurfacing. The design solutions tested in the Type 21, streamlined hulls, larger battery arrays, quieter operations, and rapid torpedo reloading, would become staples of post-war submarine engineering. The immediate post-war period saw the US and Soviet naval programs adopting or adapting these advancements. The Guppy program in the United States swiftly retrofitted older submarines with some of the lessons learned from Type 21 analysis. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union built vast fleets of diesel-electric boats closely modeled on the German blueprint. Ultimately, the Type 21's technology migrated around the globe, influencing the British Porpoise, the Swedish Hajen 3, and many more. Yet the story of the Type 21 is not just about engineering. It's also a tale of what might have been. Had Germany begun its development earlier, refined the design more thoroughly, or enjoyed uninterrupted production, the Atlantic might have seen a far different contest in the final years of the war. Historians like Clay Blair point out that even a more robust deployment of these submarines might not have reversed the inevitable defeat of Nazi Germany. By 1944, the Allies had effectively gained control of the skies, and their anti-submarine technology had come a long way. Nevertheless, the Type 21 remains a potent symbol of technological ambition, overshadowed by logistical and wartime constraints. Closing reflections. The Type 21's influence stretches beyond the machinery itself. It stands as a testament to a moment in history when submarine warfare took a significant leap toward the stealthy, autonomous operations we recognize in modern navies. Despite being introduced too late to shift the balance of World War II, these boats carried forward a legacy of submerged performance and design efficiency that continues to inform submarine development to this day. In reflecting on the Type 21, one must acknowledge not just its advanced features, but the immense human cost behind its rushed construction. From forced laborers in the Valentin pens to overworked shipyard crews struggling to meet impossible deadlines, the frantic drive to field a next-generation U-boat was filled with hardship. Ultimately, the Type 21 stands as both an engineering milestone and a cautionary tale of what happens when extraordinary ambition collides with the grim realities of war. Just as the Type 21 overcame limitations in speed and endurance, it reminds us that progress often emerges in the most harrowing circumstances. Submarine technology continues to evolve, but the echoes of this pioneering design reverberate through every hull that slips beneath the waves today. Whether it was the improved battery capacity, the streamlined hull form, or the integrated sonar systems, the lessons learned from the Type 21 have guided naval architects for decades, shaping the silent service into what we know now. And so, the short-lived story of the Electroboot has become something much larger than a wartime footnote. It is a bridge between the early undersea vessels that ventured hesitantly below the surface and the sophisticated submarines that now roam the depths with near limitless potential. In that sense, Germany's Type 21 submarines retain an almost mythic aura. symbols of both innovation and the inherent risks of pushing technology faster than it can reliably go. The Type 21 Electroboot stands as one of the most intriguing war machines to emerge from World War II, blending stealth, speed, and ambition in a quest to dominate the Atlantic. Even though it arrived too late to change the outcome of the war, its ripple effects were felt in countless submarine classes that followed. If you're interested in hearing more lesser-known World War II battles and breakthroughs, consider journeying with us again soon. Share this story with someone who loves discovering hidden chapters of history, and together, let's shed light on the untold events that shaped our world. Hit that subscribe button to stay connected. Who knows what new tales of courage and innovation await?